The day Caroline nearly died, her husband was 40 feet away, not rushing to her side, not holding her hand, standing in the lobby of the same hospital, his mistress on his arm, checking his emails. He did not know his pregnant ex-wife was on the 5th floor. He did not know she had been fighting, alone, quietly, without a single word to him, for 8 months, fighting a failing heart, fighting to stay alive long enough to deliver the son he did not know existed. And here's the part that will stay with you. She chose not to tell him, not out of spite, not out of weakness, out of the most devastating kind of dignity you will ever hear about. She looked at the man who had called her stagnant in a Forbes interview while she was home taking heart medication and monitoring her own blood pressure and praying she would survive the night. And she decided, I will not be his obligation. I will not be the problem he manages. If I only have a limited amount of time, I will spend it standing upright. She sold her grandmother's pearls to pay for her own doctors. She built a life from the inside of a catastrophe. And when her husband finally froze in that lobby, phone on the floor, the carefully constructed story he had told himself about who he was and what he had thrown away, it shattered. What happened next will change the way you think about dignity, about second chances, and about what it actually means to love someone. Stay with us. This one matters. Lesson statement, because the most powerful thing a woman can do, in any relationship, in any season of life, is refuse to make herself smaller to keep someone comfortable. Your worth does not require his recognition to be real. Meaning, this is not a story about a man who came back. It is a story about a woman who never left herself. Caroline did not survive because someone saved her. She survived because she decided every single day that she was worth saving. And in doing so, she built something that no divorce paper, no diagnosis, and no betrayal could touch. An unshakable sense of who she was. That is what we hope you carry with you when this story ends. If this story moved you, if Caroline's strength said something you needed to hear today, will you do one small thing? Hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells us that stories like this one matter to you. Leave a comment below and tell us, what was the moment that hit hardest? We read every single one. Share this with someone in your life who is quietly carrying something heavy. You may not know how much they need to hear that dignity is not the absence of pain. It is choosing to stand straight inside it. And if you are not subscribed yet, please subscribe and ring the bell. Every week we bring you stories built on real human truth. Stories about resilience, about second chances, about the hard and beautiful work of rebuilding a life. We would love for you to be part of this community.
The day I almost died, my husband was in the same building. He was on the 3rd floor, holding another woman's hand. I was on the 5th floor, holding my unborn son's heartbeat monitor, praying it wouldn't flatline before morning. My name is Caroline Hayes, and this is the story of how I lost everything, survived everything, and built something better than anything I'd ever had before. Not because a man saved me, but because I refused to be saved by the wrong reasons. It started on a Tuesday in November, Swedish Medical Center, Seattle, 10:47 in the morning. Grant Hayes stood at the lobby reception desk in a $4,000 Brioni suit, phone in one hand, Ashley Porter on his arm. Ashley was 26, with a fresh blowout and a red Valentino coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent at that point. She looked like she owned the building. She always looked like she owned whatever room she walked into. That was, I would later understand, the entire point of her. Grant was firing off emails. Ashley was pouting about her appointment running late. Something about a stomach ulcer. Something about a Zoom call at noon. Then the emergency bay doors crashed open. A gurney slammed through. Paramedics shouting over each other. Vitals unstable. PPCM flare. 5th floor. Labor and delivery. Now. The woman on the gurney was pale as paper. Sweat-soaked hair plastered to her face, one hand gripping an oxygen mask, the other hand pressed against a swollen belly, 8 months full, protecting something precious even while her own body was failing. Grant's $3,000 phone hit the marble floor. He knew those hands. He had held those hands on a beach in Charleston 7 years ago, down on one knee in the sand, asking a question he clearly stopped meaning somewhere along the way. Those were my hands. That was me on that gurney. And I had no idea he was there. I had no idea because I had spent the last 8 months making absolutely certain our lives would never intersect again. I had been quiet and careful and dignified about my exit from his world. I had not called. I had not shown up at his office. I had not sent bitter emails at midnight, though I had written approximately 40 of them and deleted every single one. I had simply disappeared. And now, here we were, same building, same Tuesday, him in his perfect suit with his perfect girlfriend, me being rushed to labor and delivery with a heart that was doing its level best to quit on me. I would not find out until much later what happened in that lobby after the doors closed behind my gurney. What I know now is that Grant stood completely still for a full 30 seconds. Ashley said his name 4 times. His phone was still on the floor. And the expression on his face, according to a nurse named Patricia Webb, who witnessed the whole thing from the station desk, was the expression of a man who has just understood something terrible and irreversible about himself. Patricia told me this story 8 months later. She said, and I am quoting directly, "He looked like a man who had just found the receipt for something he'd already thrown away." I thought that was the most accurate thing anyone had ever said about Grant Hayes. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand what happened in that hospital, you need to understand what happened in the 18 months before it. You need to understand who we were before we became Cautionary Tale. Grant and I met at a fundraiser in Pioneer Square. He was 34 and had just closed his first 9-figure real estate deal. I was 31 and had just launched a small landscape architecture firm with 2 employees and more ambition than capital. He was magnetic in this way that genuinely dangerous things often are. He walked into a room and everyone recalibrated. I should have paid more attention to that. When someone makes every room reorganize itself around them, that is useful information. But I was 31, and he was brilliant and funny, and he remembered everything I said. He remembered that I preferred Dungeness crab to lobster. He remembered that my grandmother had planted jasmine along the fence of her house in Spokane, and that the smell of it still made me feel safe. He remembered these things and deployed them with precision at exactly the right moments. We were married in 18 months. The wedding was in the garden of a vineyard outside Woodinville. I wore my grandmother's pearls. It was a beautiful day. I believed every word of it. The first 4 years were genuinely good. Not perfect, but good in the way that real things are good, with friction and compromise, and occasional spectacular arguments about whose turn it was to call the plumber. Grant worked constantly. I scaled back my firm, then sold it, then became the person who made his life run. I hosted dinners for clients and proofread proposals at 2 in the morning and stood next to him in photographs where my name was never in the caption. I told myself that was a partnership, that I was the foundation he built on. I did not understand until much later that he had stopped seeing the foundation once the building went up. The last 2 years were the slow version of drowning, the kind where the water rises so gradually that you keep adjusting, keep treading, keep telling yourself, it is fine, you are fine. This is just a difficult season. Grant was at client dinners until midnight. Grant was on his phone through every meal. Grant looked at me sometimes with an expression I could not name, but that made my chest feel hollow. My best friend, Becky Morrison, had a name for it. She called it the management look. Becky, Caroline, he is looking at you like a project that came in under budget. That is not how a husband looks at a wife. I told her she was being dramatic. She was not being dramatic. The end came on a Wednesday in March. Grant was in our kitchen in the Queen Anne house, the house I had designed down to the hardware on the cabinet doors. And he said the words I had been dreading without knowing I was dreading them. He said, "I am not happy, Caroline. This marriage has become stale. I think we both know it." I had a yellow rose in my hand from the garden. I remember that detail with complete clarity. I set it down very carefully in the vase, and I said, "If that is what you want, Grant, call your lawyer. But know this, you are making the biggest mistake of your life." He smiled at me. A small, patient smile, the kind you give someone whose opinion you have already discounted. 3 weeks later, his lawyer's courier arrived with the divorce papers. I signed them the same day. I was not going to beg. I had watched my mother beg my father to stay when I was 9 years old, and I had made a promise to myself in that kitchen that I was never going to do that. Whatever else I lost, I was keeping that. What I did not know, standing in my Fremont apartment with the uncashed settlement check on my counter and a faint nausea I was chalking up to stress, was that I was 8 days pregnant, and that the man who had just handed me the paperwork to end our marriage had also, in a moment of whiskey and grief and terrible timing 6 weeks earlier, given me the one thing he never intended to, a reason to keep fighting. 2 pink lines on a Tuesday morning. I sat on the bathroom floor of my Fremont apartment for a long time. The tiles were cold. The settlement check was still on the counter in the other room. Outside the window, I could hear the neighborhood waking up. A dog barking, someone's sprinkler running, the completely indifferent machinery of ordinary life continuing without any acknowledgement whatsoever of the fact that my world had just inverted itself for the second time in 3 weeks. I picked up my phone, found Grant's name in my contacts. I held it for probably 2 minutes, then I put the phone down. Because here is what I knew about Grant Hayes in that moment, with the clarity that only comes after you have spent 7 years paying very close attention to a person. If I called him, he would come back. Not because he loved me, because he needed to. Grant was a man who built things and managed things and solved things, and an unplanned pregnancy with his newly ex-wife was absolutely the kind of problem that would activate every instinct he had. He would fly in the best doctors. He would move back into the house or move me into a better apartment. He would be present and efficient and thorough. And every single time he looked at me, I would see it, that management look, that careful, controlled patience of a man fulfilling an obligation he had not chosen. I would rather be alone. I was already alone. At least this way it would be honest. I called my mother instead. My mother cried. Then she said, "Tell me what you need, and I will be there by Friday." What I needed, it turned out, was a cardiologist, because 10 days after the positive pregnancy test, I was sitting in the office of Dr. Helen Foster at Swedish Medical, looking at an echocardiogram that showed my heart doing something it was not supposed to do. Dr. Foster was in her mid-50s, with the kind of direct warmth that you must only find in doctors who have had enough hard conversations to stop softening them artificially. She sat across from me with the results in her hands, and she did not waste time. She said, "Caroline, you have peripartum cardiomyopathy. Your heart's ejection fraction is at 32%. Normal is above 55. What this means practically is that your heart muscle has been weakened by the pregnancy. It is not pumping effectively. And carrying this pregnancy to term will place an extreme and ongoing strain on a heart that is already compromised. I need to talk to you about your options." I knew what options meant. I said, "I am keeping him." Dr. Foster said, "Caroline, this is not a minor risk. This is a significant risk to your life." I said, "Then I will manage the risk. What do I need to do?" She looked at me for a moment. Then she closed the folder. She said, "Okay." Then we fight like hell together. That was the beginning of the 8 months that nearly killed me and also, I think, were the making of me. I want to tell you something here because I think it is important, and because I wish someone had said it to me clearly when I was sitting on that cold bathroom floor. Here it is. Financial independence is not a backup plan. It is the plan. Whatever stage of life you are in, your own account, your own credit history, your own emergency fund, these are not signs of distrust in your relationship. They are signs of self-respect. I had signed away my business and my financial autonomy over 4 years of marriage, and when the marriage ended, I was selling my grandmother's pearl earrings to pay for echocardiograms. I am not telling you this so you feel sorry for me. I am telling you this so you never end up in that position. Not because your marriage will fail, but because you deserve to be choosing to stay, not staying because you have no other option. The weeks that followed established the rhythm that would carry me through the next 8 months. Every Tuesday, Dr. Foster. Every other week, an echocardiogram, a medication schedule that required a spreadsheet, a diet so low in sodium that Becky, when she came to visit, looked at my pantry and said, "Caroline, this is how they feed people on space stations." I said, "How do you know what they feed people on space stations?" She said, "I watched a documentary. It was very sad. This is also very sad. I loved her for making me laugh." Those 8 months had very few laughs in them, and I held on to everyone. I watched Grant's life continue on social media and in the pages of Seattle Met magazine with the particular discipline of someone who knows that looking is hurting them and looks anyway. He and Ashley at a charity gala in October. He and Ashley at the Forbes Pacific Northwest Summit in November. He quoted in a business profile saying, "I needed a partner who shared my vision for what was possible. Sometimes people grow in different directions." He was talking about me. I was in my apartment with a blood pressure monitor and a home oxygen pulse reader and a belly that made it impossible to sleep on my back. And he was telling Forbes magazine that I had not shared his vision. I want to say I was above it. I was not above it. I cried about that quote for approximately 2 hours. Then Becky arrived with Thai food she had not been invited to bring and said, "Okay, I read the article. I have feelings. Can I share them?" I said, "Please." She said 11 words. She said, "He will regret every single word of that for the rest of his life." She was right, but that is getting ahead of the story again. The baby moved for the first time at 22 weeks. I was doing paperwork. I had started doing freelance landscape design consultations from home, small projects, enough to keep my mind from consuming itself. And he moved, and I stopped everything, put both hands on my stomach, just breathed. I said out loud, to no one, "I am going to get you here. I promise you, whatever it takes." Whatever it took turned out to be considerable. At 28 weeks, my ejection fraction dropped to 29%. Dr. Foster adjusted my medications. I spent 3 days in the hospital for monitoring. My mother slept on the pull-out chair in my room and did not complain once. At 32 weeks, the ejection fraction stabilized at 33. Dr. Foster called it a small victory. I called it permission to keep going. At 38 weeks, I went into labor. My heart chose that particular morning to also decide it had been cooperative long enough. The ambulance arrived at my apartment at 9:18 in the morning. I was at Swedish Medical Center by 9:40. And somewhere in that building, on a different floor, for reasons I would not understand until later, was the man who had no idea any of this had been happening. Grant Hayes was about to find out that the life he thought he had closed the door on had been building something extraordinary on the other side of that door, and the door was about to open. I do not remember much of the first hour. I remember the lights in the ceiling moving past me as they wheeled me through the corridor. I remember the sound of Dr. Foster's voice. Steady, authoritative, coordinating with the bioobstetric team in a tone that was professionally calm, but underneath it, if you knew how to listen, carried a sharpness that meant, this is serious and we are moving fast. I remember a nurse squeezing my hand and saying, "You are doing great, honey. Just breathe." I remember thinking, Oliver. His name is Oliver. Just get Oliver here, safe. The rest is machines and voices and a pain that was both the baby coming and my heart struggling to manage the effort of it. And then, at 10:53 in the morning, after an emergency procedure, that doctor. Foster would later describe as one of the most technically demanding deliveries of her career. Oliver James Kirby came into the world. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, dark hair, lungs that announced themselves to the entire wing. They let me hold him for 45 seconds before they took him to the observation nursery. I counted 45 seconds. I said, "Hi, baby." I said, I kept my promise. Then they took him for monitoring and took me to recovery, and my mother was there, holding my hand, her face doing the complex emotional mathematics of someone who is overwhelmed with relief and grief and love simultaneously. She said, "He is perfect, Evie. He is absolutely perfect." I said, "Is he okay?" She said, "He is 7 pounds and furious about being disturbed. He is completely okay." I closed my eyes and felt something that I can only describe as a release. 8 months of sustained terror, of daily monitoring and medication schedules, and nights lying awake calculating odds. All of it releasing at once, like a knot being cut. He was here. We had done it. Then my mother said, in a different voice, "He is here, Caroline. Grant. He is in the hallway." And just like that, the knot was back. She told me what had happened, how Grant had been in the lobby with Ashley when they brought me in, how he had followed to the 5th floor and been stopped at the nurse's station, how he had been in the family lounge for nearly 2 hours, waiting. I closed my eyes again. The heart monitor beeped its steady, indifferent rhythm. I thought about what Ashley's face must have looked like. I thought about what Grant's face must have looked like. I thought about the fact that the universe, which I had always suspected had a dark sense of humor, had apparently arranged for my husband to witness my medical emergency while accompanying his girlfriend to a stomach ulcer appointment. I said, "Send him in, then I want you to leave us alone." My mother said, "Evie, you just came out of a major procedure. You do not have to do this today." I said, "Dorothy, I carried this baby for 9 months while my heart was failing. I can handle 10 minutes with his father." She squeezed my hand, got up, went to the door. I used the 30 seconds she was gone to do 3 things. I smoothed my hair as best I could with hands that were still shaky from the medication. I adjusted the hospital blanket, and I found the place inside myself that had kept me upright for 8 months, and made sure it was still there. It was. The door opened with a quiet hydraulic hiss. Grant Hayes stepped inside. He looked terrible. That was the first thing I noticed, and I will admit I noticed it with a small, uncharitable satisfaction. The perfect suit was rumpled. His face was the color of old wax, the usual command he carried in his posture, that particular set of the shoulders that said, "I own this room." It was gone. He looked like a man who had been standing in a cold hallway for 2 hours, rearranging everything he thought he knew. Good, I thought. Welcome to my last 8 months. He took 2 steps in, stopped. His eyes moved from me to the empty bassinet in the corner and back to me. He said, "Caroline, my God." I said, "His name is Oliver. Oliver James Kirby. He is yours." I watched the words land watched his hand reach for the footboard of the bed because his legs had apparently stopped working correctly. His mouth opened and closed once. He said, "Why? Why didn't you tell me? I would have—" I said, "I know exactly what you would have done." My voice came out steadier than I expected. 8 months of rehearsing this conversation in my head, lying awake at 2 in the morning while my heart monitor beeped and Oliver moved against my ribs. All of that had prepared me for this moment with a precision that surprised even me. I said, "You would have come back, not because you wanted to, because you are a man who finishes what he starts and cleans up what he breaks. You would have managed me, Grant, efficiently and thoroughly, and with that look on your face that I spent the last 2 years of our marriage trying to pretend I did not see, and I would have spent whatever time I had left watching you resent the obligation of me." He said, "That is not fair." I said, "I almost died 3 separate times in the last 8 months. I sold my grandmother's pearls to pay for echocardiograms. I spent 6 nights alone in this hospital for monitoring while you were being photographed at charity galas. Do not talk to me about fair, Grant. You do not get to use that word in this room today." He was quiet. In the quiet, the door opened. Ashley Porter stood in the doorway. Red coat, perfect hair, eyes moving from Grant to me to the bassinet with the rapid assessing intelligence of someone who is very good at reading rooms and is currently reading one that is very bad. She said, "I have been looking for you for an hour. The doctor said my stomach is fine. It is just stress." She paused. "Who is she?" Grant said. "Ashley." "Not now," she said. "Not now. I drove myself to this hospital because you disappeared. Not now." Her eyes had landed on the bassinet. She was very still. She said, "Grant, is that... whose baby is that?" I answered for him. I said, "I am his wife." She said, "Ex-wife." I said, "Ask him how many times he said my name in his sleep during the 6 months you were together. Then we can discuss prefixes." That landed the way I intended it to. Grant's jaw tightened. Ashley's composure, which had been impressive up to this point, developed a visible crack. She turned to Grant. Her voice had dropped to something low and tightly controlled. She said, "You have a child with her, a secret child, while you were telling me we had a future, while I was telling my family about you." Grant said, "I did not know. Ashley, I swear to you I found out today." She said, "That makes it worse, Grant, not better. Do you understand that? It makes it worse because it means you were walking around with this landmine in your life and you did not even have the basic self-awareness to know it was there." Then she said, "Choose, right now. Walk out with me and we never speak of this again. Or stay." She gestured toward me with something on her face that I chose not to take personally because she was 26 and in pain, and I had been 26 and in pain once too, and people do not always behave their best in those moments. Grant looked at her. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the bassinet. He did not move. Ashley watched him not move. She said, "I see." She unclasped her bag, a beautiful Chanel bag, probably a gift. The math was not hard, and she set it on the floor rather than throwing it, which I respected. Then she walked out. Her heels made a clean, decisive sound in the hallway and then faded. The silence she left behind was very large. Grant was still standing at the foot of my bed, not looking at me, looking at the bassinet. I said, "You should go. You have done enough for one day." He said, "Caroline?" I said, "Grant." "Get out of my room." He went. The heart monitor kept its steady rhythm. Oliver was in the nursery. 7 pounds of furious, perfect life, and I was alone in room 308, and the man who had broken my world had just had his own broken in return, and I did not feel triumphant about it. I felt tired, profoundly, deeply tired, and underneath the tired, very quiet, barely audible, something that might have been the first thread of something new. Grant drove for an hour. He did not know where he was going. He took the I-5 south and then got off and got back on and eventually found himself parked in front of a coffee shop in Capitol Hill that he had no memory of driving to. The rain was doing what Seattle rain does in November, which is fall with a kind of patient, deliberate insistence that suggests it has absolutely nowhere else to be. He sat in the car and called Patrick Cole. Patrick answered on the second ring with the particular alertness of a lawyer who has learned that calls from certain clients at certain hours never mean good news. He said, "Grant, tell me you are not calling me from a hospital." Grant said, "Caroline's there. She had the baby. It is mine." Patrick said nothing for a moment. Then, "How long have you known?" Grant said, "Since about 45 minutes ago." Patrick made a sound that was not quite a word. Then his professional instincts took over, and he began listing implications. Paternity, estate, child support calculations at Grant's income level, the prenuptial agreement and its limitations, the fact that a legal heir changed the structure of Grant's holdings in ways that would require significant restructuring. Grant listened to approximately 1 minute of this before he said, "Patrick, is she going to be okay?" Patrick stopped. He said, "That is not a legal question, Grant." Grant said, "I know. I am asking you anyway." Patrick said, "I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't have that information." Grant sat with that for a moment. Then his phone lit up with a name he had not expected, Dorothy Hayes, his mother. He answered. His mother did not say hello. She said, "Grant William Hayes, I know where you are." He said, "Mom," she said, "I have known for 4 months. Caroline called me. She asked me not to tell you. She just wanted me to know I was going to be a grandmother. She said she did not want to deprive me of that regardless of what happened between you and her." The sentence landed in Grant's chest like a stone dropped into still water. He said, "She called you." Dorothy said, "She called me from a tiny apartment in Fremont." She had just come from a cardiology appointment. Her voice was completely steady. She said, "Dorothy, I wanted you to hear this from me. You are going to have a grandson. He is due in the spring. I hope you will be part of his life." Grant said nothing. Dorothy said, "She did not ask me for anything, Grant. Not one thing. She was fighting for her life, and she called to make sure I knew I was going to be a grandmother. That is the woman you threw away. I want you to sit with that." Her voice, which had been sharp, shifted. She said, "I am on my way to the hospital. When you have finished feeling sorry for yourself, go do something useful." She hung up. Grant stared at the rain on the windshield. The phone rang again. This time, Julian Porter. Grant answered. Julian said, "Grant, my niece just landed in Maui. She is very upset. She sent me a rather detailed account of what happened today at Swedish Medical." Grant said, Julian said, "Let me finish. Ashley is not just my niece, Grant. She is the family member I recommended to you for her position. You will understand why her situation reflects on me professionally. You will also understand why Vance Capital cannot be associated with a leadership team that is, as of today, one tabloid headline away from a full governance crisis." Grant said, "Julian, the situation is complicated." Julian said, "Vance Capital is withdrawing from the Bellevue development. Our attorneys will be in touch within 24 hours. I am sorry, Grant. I genuinely am. But I cannot explain this to my LPs." The line went dead. Grant sat very still. $200 million. The Bellevue project was an $800 million development. Losing Vance Capital at this stage would trigger covenant reviews across his primary credit lines. It could cascade. It could genuinely, actually cascade. He called Patrick back. He said, "Julian Porter just pulled Vance Capital from Bellevue." Patrick said, with an urgency that Patrick did not usually allow himself, "Grant, you have to fix that. Call Julian back. Apologize. Send Ashley flowers. Send her a car. Whatever it takes." Grant said, "No." Patrick said, "Grant?" Grant said, "Patrick, stop. I need you to do 3 things. First, find out the name of every specialist Caroline has seen in the last 9 months. Every cardiologist, every obstetrician. I want every bill. Pay them, all of them, from a private account, anonymously." Patrick said, "Grant, paying her medical bills could be construed as an admission of—" Grant said, "I don't care what it's construed as. Do it." Second, draw up a trust in the name of Oliver James Kirby. Fund it with $50 million. A silence. Patrick said, $50 million. Grant said, $50 million. Third, liquidate my shares in Rainier Square Tower. Use the proceeds to cover the Vance withdrawal. We take the loss. The project goes forward at reduced scope. Patrick said, "Grant, you are describing a scenario in which you voluntarily absorb a loss of—" Grant said, "I know what I am describing. Do it." He ended the call. He sat in the car for another 10 minutes. The rain kept falling. A woman walked past with an umbrella and a small dog, and the complete unconcern of someone who had no idea that a man was sitting in the car beside the curb, dismantling his own empire. Then Grant did something he had not done in approximately 15 years. He drove to a Target. He walked the aisles with a cart and no list, and a profound sense of being an alien in a world that everyone else understood intuitively. He bought diapers in 2 sizes because he did not know which size was correct. He bought baby wipes and formula and a soft plush elephant with a friendly face and a rattle inside it. The cashier, a teenager with AirPods in, scanned everything without comment. Total came to $63.47. It was the most meaningful purchase Grant Hayes had made in years. He drove to Ballard. He had the address from the lawyer's file, the house where Caroline had grown up, where her mother had lived for 30 years. He did not plan what he was going to say. He parked. He carried the Target bags to the porch. He arranged them by the door. He was turning to leave when the door opened. Dorothy Hayes stood in the doorway in an apron dusted with flour. She looked at him, then at the bags, then back at him. Grant said, "I cannot undo any of it, but I can be this. I can bring diapers and pay the bills. I will not ask for anything. I just need you to let me help." Dorothy looked at him for a long time. She said, "She is breastfeeding. She does not need formula." He said, "Right. I did not know that." Dorothy sighed, a long, complicated sigh that contained approximately 40 years of motherhood and hard-won perspective. She said, "The gutters are full of leaves. I was supposed to have a man come out weeks ago, but things have been difficult," she said. "There is a ladder in the shed." She closed the door. Grant found the ladder. He climbed onto the roof of his ex-mother-in-law's house in the Seattle rain in a $200 cashmere sweater, and he cleaned the gutters. It took an hour and a half. He was soaked through before he was done. It was the first honest work he had done in longer than he could remember. The article ran on Thursday. Puget Sound Insider was not a publication Grant had ever paid attention to before, which was perhaps why he was caught completely off guard by its efficiency. The headline read, Real estate titan. Grant Hayes has secret baby with ex-wife he publicly called stagnant, 1 week after bringing new girlfriend to same hospital. The Forbes profile quote. His own words, his own voice published 6 months prior in a magazine he had been proud to appear in, was the first paragraph. The writer had done very little except arrange the facts chronologically and let them speak. They spoke loudly. By Friday morning, the story had been picked up by 3 Seattle news outlets and 1 national business publication. By Friday afternoon, Grant's PR firm sent a collective resignation letter that copied, according to Patrick's horrified reading of it, 7 separate journalists. Patrick called to relay this information. He said, "They CC'd the Seattle Times, Grant." Grant said, "Of course they did." He was sitting in his penthouse, which no longer felt like a kingdom. It felt like what it actually was, a very expensive, very empty room with a very good view of a city that was currently discussing his personal failures. His CFO texted, "We need to talk today." His COO texted, "Board is asking questions. Call me." 3 of his largest property managers texted variations of the same thing, which was, "Is everything okay? We saw the news, just checking in," which was the professional equivalent of watching someone's house burn and asking if they needed a glass of water. Grant called his CFO. The conversation was brief and bleak. The Vance Capital withdrawal had done exactly what Grant had known it would do. 2 covenant reviews triggered on his primary credit line. One of his lenders was requesting an emergency meeting to discuss what they were calling a material change in leadership stability. The Bellevue project, without restructuring, was 30 days from defaulting. Grant said, "Sell the penthouse, list it today, and the yacht." His CFO said, "Grant?" Grant said, "Do it, and get me the figures on liquidating Rainier Square. I want to know what we can save on the Bellevue construction crew if we restructure now versus defaulting later." His CFO said, "You are talking about a personal net worth reduction of..." Grant said, "I know what I'm talking about. Save the jobs, the construction crew, the subcontractors, the junior staff, everyone whose mortgage depends on those paychecks. The penthouse is a monument to my ego. I can live without it." He moved into a serviceable 2-bedroom condo in South Lake Union 2 weeks later. His neighbor was a retired school teacher named Walter, who made chili in quantities appropriate for a medium-sized family despite living alone. Walter knocked on the door the first morning with a container of chili and the comfortable confidence of a man who has lived in the same building for 12 years and has opinions about welcoming new neighbors. He said, "You just moved in? I make too much chili. Here." Grant, in jeans and an old Seattle Seahawks sweatshirt, in a 1,200 square foot apartment that was approximately 4% the size of the penthouse, said, "I would love some chili. Thank you." Walter said, "You look like someone who has not eaten a home-cooked meal in a while." Grant said, "That is accurate." Walter said, "Sit down then. I will heat it up." Grant sat at a neighbor's kitchen table and ate chili, and the world did not end. That was the second catastrophe in progress, while the first one was still playing out. The third arrived on a Wednesday. Ashley Porter filed a workplace complaint with Hayes Global Properties legal department. The complaint was not for harassment. It was considerably more sophisticated than that. She alleged conflict of interest, that her promotion to Director of Brand Strategy had been accelerated due to her personal relationship with Grant, creating legal liability for the company and potential claims from other employees who had been passed over. It was, Patrick said, when he read it, extremely well constructed. Grant suspected Ashley had a very good lawyer. He did not blame her. The board convened an emergency governance review 48 hours later. The result was a temporary suspension of Grant's active CEO role pending investigation. His COO assumed operational authority. Grant was asked to step away from day-to-day management for a minimum of 60 days. He sat in his car outside the Hayes Global Properties building. The building with his name on it, in steel letters 4 feet tall, on the side of a tower he had built from the ground up over 15 years. He could not go in. Dorothy called. She said, "I heard about the board decision." He said, "How?" She said, "I have my sources. Are you all right?" He said, "No." She said, without a pause, "Good. Okay is what you call it when you are not paying attention. How is Caroline?" The question landed with precision. He said, "I don't know. She won't see me." Dorothy said, "Grant, when is the last time you did something that was not about the company or about managing how things look?" He did not answer. She said, "Maybe losing the company for a little while is the best thing that ever happened to you. Maybe it is the only thing that was ever going to teach you what actually matters." She hung up. He sat in the parking lot for 20 more minutes, then he drove to Ballard. He restained the front porch. It took 3 hours. His hands were not accustomed to that kind of work. He did it anyway. He did not see Caroline. He did not ask to. He was learning, slowly and painfully, the difference between presence and demand. He was learning that showing up was not the same as arriving and expecting to be let in. He was learning that some things could not be managed. They could only be earned. He was learning this approximately 10 years later than he should have, but he was learning. 3 weeks after Oliver was born, I was home. Home was still the Fremont apartment, though Dorothy had quietly arranged for the rent to be covered in a way she described as a grandmother's prerogative, and I accepted because I was too tired to argue, and also because Dorothy Hayes was one of the few people in the situation who had behaved with complete integrity from beginning to end. Oliver was extraordinary. I want to say that, clearly, because the medical circumstances of his arrival and the complicated human wreckage surrounding it could make it easy to miss. He was an extraordinary baby, alert and opinionated, and capable of a focused, evaluative stare that made you feel he was considering your worth as a person. He had my hair, he had Grant's chin, he had his own particular energy that belonged entirely to himself. I was managing. My ejection fraction had come up to 38% post-delivery. Not normal, not where we needed it long-term, but improved from the dangerous low of 32. Dr. Foster was cautiously optimistic. The medication schedule was still extensive, and the fatigue was real, but I was upright and functional, and my son was healthy, and I chose every morning to count those facts as victories. Grant was a fixed point in my peripheral vision. I did not engage with him directly, but I was aware of his presence in the way you are aware of weather. He appeared at Dorothy's house on Saturdays. He was in the waiting room at Swedish on Tuesday mornings when I came in for Dr. Foster's appointments. He did not approach me. He did not send messages through Dorothy. He simply appeared and sat quietly and left. Becky had opinions about this. Becky, I am just saying. The man is sitting in a waiting room every week in jeans. That is not the behavior of someone going through motions. I said, Becky. She said, I know. I am just observing. I said, your observations are noted. She said, also, Dorothy told me he cleaned the gutters. In the rain, in Kashmir. I said, that is his own poor planning. She said, Caroline, I say this as your best friend and as someone who sat with you through the worst year of your life. You are allowed to be angry. You are allowed to take a very long time. But do not let the anger become a wall that keeps out something real. I said, It is not a wall. It is a boundary. She said, "What is the difference?" I said, "A wall keeps everything out. A boundary is a door you control." She thought about that. She said, "Okay, that is actually very wise. Can I use that?" I said, "Please do not put that on Instagram." She said, "What if I don't tag you?" I said, "Becky." She said, "Fine." It was in this period that I began what would become the most meaningful project of my adult life. I had found, in the fog of those long hospital nights and quiet apartment evenings, that what I needed most was to talk to other women who understood what peripartum cardiomyopathy actually felt like. Not medically. Dr. Foster was excellent for that, but emotionally. The particular terror of loving something you are growing while not knowing if your own body will hold long enough to deliver it. The isolation of being sick in a way that is invisible until it is catastrophic. I posted in a small online health forum, asked if anyone else was navigating PPCM. 43 women responded in 48 hours. I read everyone, wrote back to everyone. Within 2 weeks, we had a private group. Within a month, we had women joining from 12 states. Here's what I want you to understand about that, because I think it is important, and I think it is the truest thing I know about surviving hard things. The moment you take your pain and turn it outward, not to perform it, not to weaponize it, but to genuinely offer it to someone who needs to know they are not alone, the pain changes. It does not disappear, but it becomes useful. It becomes something with purpose. And purpose is one of the most powerful medicines I know. I was still fragile. I was still tired. I was still navigating the enormous complexity of being a new mother with a heart condition and a complicated co-parenting situation with a man I was not ready to forgive. But I had a purpose. And I had Oliver. And I had Becky, who arrived every Thursday with food she had not been invited to bring and opinions she had not been asked to share, and the kind of absolute, unconditional loyalty that I understood in those months was the rarest and most valuable thing in any life. Then Ashley Porter knocked on my door. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Oliver was asleep. I answered in a sweatshirt and no makeup and the look of someone who had not fully slept in 3 weeks. Ashley was in normal clothes, not the red coat, not the polished armor, jeans and a gray jacket, hair pulled back. She looked younger. She also looked like someone who had been thinking about something for a long time and had decided to stop thinking and do it. She said, "I am not here to fight. I just have something I need to say, and then I will leave." I considered closing the door. I did not close the door. She said, "He talked about you the whole time we were together, not to me directly, but on the phone, in his sleep. You were always there, like a static in the background I could not tune out, and I convinced myself that it meant he was moving on and just needed time. I told myself that enough times to believe it." She looked at me directly. She said, "I need you to know I am not your villain. I am just the person who believed a man who was not finished with his previous story. That is my mistake. I own it." Then she said, "He is going to hurt you again. Men like that do not change. I want you to know what you are dealing with." She left. I closed the door and stood with my back against it. I believed her. Not the part about Grant, but the part about herself. I believed that she was telling her own truth as she understood it, and I found that I did not have the energy to hate her. But the part about Grant, that burrowed in. Men like that do not change. I had not let myself want Grant to change. I had not let myself hope for anything in that direction, because hope was expensive and I had a very limited budget. But the fact that Ashley's words could find purchase meant that somewhere very quietly, against my own instructions to myself, I had started to hope anyway. I stopped answering the door on Saturdays. I stopped going to the Tuesday waiting room and started scheduling my appointments for Thursday afternoons instead. I did not tell Grant why. I told myself it was a boundary, not a wall. I was not entirely sure I was right. The Thursday that changed everything started at 3 in the morning. I woke from a shallow sleep with a pressure in my chest that I recognized immediately. I had been trained over 8 months of living with PPCM to know the difference between anxiety and cardiac symptoms. And what I was feeling at 3 in the morning in my Fremont apartment was not anxiety. My oxygen saturation monitor read 89%. Should have been above 95. I called 911. My voice came out smaller than I intended. I gave the address. I said, I have peripartum cardiomyopathy. I think I am in pulmonary edema. The dispatcher was calm and professional. Oliver was asleep in the next room. I unlocked the front door while I still could. Then I sat down on the hallway floor because my legs had decided they were done for the moment. I thought Oliver. That was the only thought I had room for. The paramedics found me on the floor 9 minutes later. Oliver was awake in the crib, crying, completely safe and furious about it. The paramedics confirmed his safety, called for a second team to coordinate with Child Protective Services for immediate family contact, and got me onto the stretcher. Swedish Medical Center was 8 minutes away. Dorothy Hayes was Oliver's emergency contact. Dorothy called Grant at 3:47 in the morning. Grant arrived at the hospital at 3:58. He was not wearing matching shoes. I would not learn this detail until later. One brown, one black. He had not turned on a light when he got dressed. He had simply grabbed whatever was on the floor and left. Dr. Foster's team stabilized me over the next 4 hours. Pulmonary edema, as I had suspected. The diuretics worked. My lungs cleared. By 7 in the morning, I was stable and exhausted, and the color, according to Dr. Foster, was coming back to my face. I did not know, in those 4 hours, that Grant was in the family lounge. I did not know that Dorothy had arrived at my apartment, taken Oliver from the CPS coordinator with the calm authority of a grandmother who intends to be unreasonable if necessary, and called Grant. I did not know that Dorothy, looking at Oliver and then at Grant, had said, I cannot stay here right now. I need to be with Caroline. You are going to take this baby. And that Grant had said, what? And Dorothy had said, you are his father, Grant. Take the baby. She had handed him the diaper bag, the car seat, and Oliver, and left. I learned all of this from Dorothy over the following weeks, in pieces, because she considered it important that I have the full picture. What I know about that night, reconstructed from Dorothy's account, and later from Grant himself. He took Oliver back to the South Lake Union condo. He warmed the bottled breast milk Dorothy had packed to the wrong temperature twice. He changed a diaper successfully on the second attempt. He walked the length of the apartment approximately 200 times. Oliver screamed for 40 minutes straight with the focused intensity of a person who has extremely clear opinions about his circumstances and is determined to express them. At 2 in the morning, Grant sat down on the floor with his back against the couch and Oliver on his chest and tried to remember any song at all. What came was something from a long time ago. His father, in their Knoxville kitchen on Sunday mornings, working at the counter while the radio played, an old Johnny Cash song. Simple and repetitive and very American and completely unconcerned with its own importance. Grant started to hum it. Oliver stopped crying, blinked, considered, grabbed Grant's collar with both hands, fell asleep. Grant did not move for 2 hours. He sat on the floor of his condo in South Lake Union with his son asleep on his chest and the city quiet outside the window, and he wept. Not performed weeping, not the kind of crying that is partly watching yourself cry. The kind that comes from somewhere so deep and so long, denied, that it has its own pressure, its own necessity. He wept for Oliver, and he wept for me, and he wept for the years he had spent building monuments to himself, while the things worth building were right in front of him. Here's what I think about that now. With the distance of time, it is possible to spend an entire adulthood running from the specific vulnerability that is also your greatest capacity. Grant was a man who had confused control with strength for so long that he had forgotten what strength actually felt like. Strength is not the absence of fear. Strength is Oliver screaming at 2 a.m. and you sitting down on the floor and humming Johnny Cash until it works. Grant had been strong his whole life. He had just been strong in the wrong direction. Morning came gray and quiet. Grant arrived at the hospital at 8:15 with Oliver in the car seat and a diaper bag that Dorothy had packed with the efficiency of someone who knew what they were doing, and a paper cup of coffee that he had gotten from the cart in the lobby, because some part of him remembered that I drank coffee when I was allowed to have it, and he was not entirely sure if I was allowed to have it, but he brought it anyway. The nurse at the station, Patricia Webb, the same nurse who had stopped him cold on the day Oliver was born, looked up when he appeared. She looked at Oliver. She looked at Grant. She looked at the 2 different shoes. She said, "Room 312. She is awake." He said, "Thank you." She said, "You've got 10 minutes before her mother arrives and rearranges your face." He said, "Understood." I was sitting up in the hospital bed when he came in. The oxygen monitors were still attached, but the numbers were good. Dr. Foster had told me that an hour earlier. My ejection fraction under stress had held at 36%. We were not out of the woods, but we were in a clearing. I looked at Grant when he came through the door. Then I looked at Oliver. Something happened in my chest that had nothing to do with the PPCM. Grant said, "He is okay. He is good. He does not like his milk too warm, and apparently he is a Johnny Cash fan." I said, "He gets that from Dorothy." Grant said, "That is what I told him." He walked to the bed. He did not ask. He simply, carefully, with both hands, the way you handle something irreplaceable, placed Oliver in the crook of my arm. Oliver turned his face toward me immediately. That particular rooting instinct. That absolute, unconditional recognition. I held my son, and I looked at Grant. The granite was gone. I had been holding it in place for weeks, months longer. The careful, necessary hardness that had kept me functional and upright and protected. And in that moment, with Oliver warm against my ribs and Grant standing there in one brown shoe and one black shoe because he had not stopped to check, it was simply gone. What was left was not forgiveness. I want to be precise about that, because precision matters here. It was not forgiveness, and it was not trust, and it was not the resumption of anything that had come before. It was something quieter and more honest than all of those. It was recognition. I recognized that the man standing in front of me was not the same man who had handed me divorce papers. I did not know yet what he was instead. But he was different, and the difference was real. And I was, despite my best efforts to prevent it, beginning to be curious about who he was becoming. I said, "You stayed with him all night." He said, "Of course I did." I said, "Thank you, Grant." He just nodded. His throat was doing something that prevented speech. Dorothy arrived 12 minutes later. She looked at Grant's shoes and said nothing, which from Dorothy was the most eloquent possible response. She looked at me and Oliver. She sat down in the chair beside the bed, and she took my free hand, and she said, "There she is." The 3 of us, 4 of us, sat in the gray morning light of room 312, and the monitors beeped and Oliver slept, and something that had been broken for a long time began, very slowly, very tentatively, to consider the possibility of a different shape. It was not repair. Repair implies returning to the original. It was something new. Becky arrived at noon with Thai food for the entire floor and the energy of someone who had been waiting weeks to hug me properly. She took one look at Grant, and then looked at his shoes, and then looked at me with an expression that communicated approximately 11 separate opinions simultaneously, none of which she said out loud. Later, in the hallway, she said to him, "One brown and one black." Dorothy told me about the 11 minutes. He said, "I was not paying attention to the shoes." She said, "No, you were paying attention to the right things." She went back inside. Grant stood in the hallway for a moment, then he went to find coffee and left us alone. Redemption, I have learned, is not a moment. It is a practice. It is the 11 minutes from phone call to hospital parking lot with unmatched shoes. It is showing up to a Tuesday waiting room for 3 months without being asked and without expecting acknowledgement. It is assembling a complicated Scandinavian crib at 10 o'clock at night in a nursery while your son watches you from his grandmother's arms with the evaluative stare of someone who is reserving judgment. Grant practiced it, day after day, week after week. He never missed a Saturday in Ballard. He was at every medical appointment, in the waiting room, not invited in, not demanding entry, simply present. When my second pulmonary event happened in month 2 of Oliver's life, a minor one, managed outpatient, scary but controlled, Grant was the one who picked Oliver up from Dorothy's and kept him for the weekend without being asked. Oliver loved him. That was the simplest and most complicated fact of the situation. Oliver at 4 months would reach for Grant with both arms. Oliver at 6 months would fall asleep on Grant's chest in approximately 3 minutes, regardless of how wound up he had been. Oliver at 8 months said a sound that was almost dada and looked directly at Grant when he said it. And Grant's face did something I had never seen his face do before. It was not pride exactly. It was more than pride. It was the expression of a man who has been handed something he knows he does not deserve and is determined to be worthy of it anyway. The governance investigation concluded in month 3. The board found no actionable misconduct. Ashley's complaint, while strategically constructed, did not meet the threshold for the specific claims she had made. Grant was reinstated as CEO. He came back to a smaller company. The Bellevue project had been restructured, completed at 70% of its original scope, and had turned a modest profit. His net worth had stabilized at what his financial team called a sustainable level, which meant he was still extraordinarily wealthy by any ordinary measure, but had no monuments left. The penthouse was sold. The yacht was sold. The name on the building remained, because his employees had worked to put it there, and he was not going to take that from them. The Forbes journalist who had printed the quote about Caroline, the one about not sharing his vision, reached out for a follow-up piece. Grant declined. He told Patrick, "I am not interested in shaping any more narratives. I am interested in doing the work." My PPCS support group hit 4,000 members in month 4. A cardiologist at Massachusetts General named Dr. Ruth Alderman reached out about a potential collaboration. A peer-reviewed paper on patient-led support outcomes in PPCM cases. I said yes. I started writing at Oliver's nap time and after his bedtime. I started sleeping better because I was using my mind for something purposeful. My ejection fraction hit 43% in month 5. Dr. Foster called it significant progress. She did not use the word remission yet, but she used the word trajectory, and her tone when she used it was the tone of someone who is seeing the thing they hoped for. In month 5, I allowed Grant to take Oliver on a Saturday. not to Dorothy's, to his own apartment, just the two of them. An afternoon. I drove home from dropping Oliver off, and I sat in my car for 20 minutes before going inside because I was not sure what I was feeling. Becky texted, "Are you okay?" I texted back, "I think so. I think he is going to be fine." She texted, "I meant you." I sat with that. Then I texted, "I think so. I think I might be okay too." At month 5.5, I ran into Ashley Porter at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. It was genuinely accidental. We saw each other at approximately the same moment. We both considered our options. I walked over and said, "Can I sit for a minute?" She said, "Sure." We sat. The coffee shop was playing something quiet and instrumental. Outside, Seattle was doing its November thing with the rain. I said, "I thought about what you said. When you came to my door," she said, "I should not have come to your door. That was not appropriate." I said, "Maybe not, but you were honest. And I want you to know the thing you said about men not changing. I think you were telling me the truth as you understood it, but I also think what you knew was a version of him, not the whole thing." She looked at me. She said, "You are being very reasonable about someone who had considerable reason not to be." I said, "I have a 4-month-old and a heart condition and a very limited energy budget. I cannot afford to carry things I do not need to carry." She almost smiled. "Not quite." She said, "How is he, Oliver?" I said, "He is extraordinary. He has Grant's chin and my stubbornness and his own particular way of looking at people like he is taking notes." She said, "He sounds exhausting." I said, "Completely." We drank our coffee. We did not become friends, but we became something. Two women who had both loved the same man in different ways and had both survived it and were both in our different directions moving forward. I walked home through the rain, and I thought about something that Becky had said months ago, back in my Fremont apartment when I was measuring the distance between a wall and a door. She had said, "You are allowed to take a very long time, but do not let the anger become a wall that keeps out something real." I had a door. I had been controlling it carefully. I thought that was strength. I was beginning to understand that strength was not the control of the door. Strength was knowing when to open it. 1 year later, the Ballard house on a Saturday in October. The maple in the front yard had gone full amber. The jasmine my grandmother had given Dorothy had spread along the fence and was done for the season, but would come back in spring. It always did. Oliver was 13 months old and walking, which was the wrong word for what he was actually doing. Toddling was closer, lunging with confidence and extremely limited success. He had fallen down 4 times in the last 20 minutes and gotten up each time with the offended dignity of someone who considers the floor personally responsible. Grant was on the living room floor with a set of wooden building blocks, restacking the tower for the 6th